It was never about the money. You may have heard about this story by now. A local school district here in Luzerne County, Wyoming Valley West, sent letters to families with unpaid lunch debt. Yes, in America, lunch debt is a real thing. And they threatened to have kids removed from their families and placed in foster care if the debt wasn't paid. The total debt was about $22,000, and they sent about 1,000 letters, they said. So that's an average of $22 per student. For an average of $22 of lunch debt per child, the school district threatened to have children separated from their parents and placed in foster care. But it was never about the money. See, I thought this would remain some local story, but it blew up like I had never expected. It made CNN, it made the New York Times, it made NPR. It's national news, possibly even international news. And while some people at the school district state they had no idea these letters were going out until the story broke, other school district representatives have doubled down and defended the threats, stating that the aggressive tone was necessary to get the debt paid, even as local children and youth have publicly stated that the letters were absurd and offensive and they never take children away from their families over school lunch debt. But this story became huge, and people started offering donations to cover the debt, which doesn't address the fundamental problem here, but it's still well-intentioned. And along came a businessman from Philadelphia by the name of Todd Carmichael. He's the CEO and co-founder of Lacombe Coffee. Lacombe, I think I'm pronouncing that right, I'm not sure. He offered to pay off the entire $22,000 debt for every student of the district, no strings attached. And the school board president, Joe Mazur, refused the donation because it was never really about the money. I mean, seriously, could that be any more obvious? They send out threatening letters to collect $22,000. Someone says, "Here, I'll give you $22,000," and they respond, "No, thanks." How can anyone claim it's about the money when they refuse the money? So, it was never about the money, which leaves the obvious question. What was it about? Well, on the small scale, it's about a person exercising power. A well-off old white man in a position of authority making himself feel big by abusing that authority to hurt others under the guise of fiscal responsibility. Because there were better ways to handle this, less hostile and less confrontational and less threatening ways to handle this, that they should have turned to first. In fact, this could have been better addressed right in the cafeteria. When I was a student in school, lunches were paid in cash, but I understand that now students have cards with funds deposited to them and they use that instead, so they don't actually have the cash in school. A parent can drop $20 on the card for the week and the kid is set. However, kids are not always responsible, and some will burn through that faster than they should, maybe buying some extra sides or snacks, sharing with friends, whatever. Now, the school doesn't deny kids food if the money isn't on the card, which is sensible. But certainly there's a point where they can see which kids are potentially taking advantage of this or run into debt frequently, and they can address it with the families or by putting a per-day limit on the card without threatening to have children and youth put the kids in foster care. And beyond that, just take a look at this situation from a more fundamental standpoint. They're kids, they're at school, they need to eat. Why is feeding children such a controversial "this needs to be paid for" issue? Why is feeding anyone such a controversial issue? People need to eat. For Christ's sakes, just feed them. Now, Joe Mazur must have known that this letter was going to be a problem, and the fact that it was sent without the knowledge of the rest of the board suggests as much, unless he's just so full of himself and his power and his own sense of self-righteousness that he never really considered that anything that he did could be considered worthy of criticism, which I admit is also a very real possibility. But this is the worst sort of punching down. This is an attack on children, an attack on the families that have less money, less means to cover their children's lunch expenses, and it's an open threat to destroy families over an average of $22. Do you think Joe Mazur and his supporters think that they're doing something good with this? Do you think they even care? But that's a small scale. On the larger scale, it's another expansion of America's horrific conflation of economic well-being with the expectation of fundamental decency. This country vilifies and demonizes the poor. We celebrate the rich even as they gut businesses, taking the money and running while putting everyone out of work, and then we criticize the people who lost their jobs for not having enough money and needing help. We praise the rich for their acumen at becoming rich by making other people poor. We criticize the people victimized by this, saying they should have planned better and that their struggles are indicative of some sort of failing on their part. We use wealth as a measure of morality, when in fact the exact opposite is what tends to be true. People who aren't spilling over with money often have trouble with basic needs. Some studies have shown that as many as half of the children in America, and this is a direct quote, experience low food security, unquote, at some point during any given calendar year, with that phrase being chosen to cushion the much worse sounding reality that children are starving in America. But rather than help them, we blame the victim. We decide that if they don't have money, they screwed up, they didn't prepare, they did something wrong. We make it an issue of morality wrapped up in the guise of personal responsibility, because then we can blame them for being poor without doing anything about it. If we make it their problem, we can pass responsibility for their situation onto them and do nothing to address the problem that caused their situation. We can say that it's 100% their fault, even if they're children. And by making it a moral issue, we can believe the lie that victims of circumstance deserve what they get. We can spread the lie that they brought it on themselves, and once this is done, these people can be delegitimized and dehumanized. This happened because they're immoral, because they made bad decisions, because they deserve it. And the poor turn on the poor, demanding to know why they should help someone less fortunate when obviously these people could help themselves if they just cared enough to try. And when they do try, borrowing money on credit, on going deeper into debt just to meet basic needs for survival, we turn that against them too, for spending money they don't have, for going into debt instead of living within their means, even if such a thing isn't possible when a person makes so little that they can't afford rent and food and medical care at the same time. We have an economy that sustains itself by pushing people deeper and deeper into debt to survive, and a culture that shames people for being in debt. And make no mistake, many of these kids are going to feel shame. There's going to be questions between students of who got a letter and who didn't, and mockery of those who did, and laughter and cruel jokes about being sent to foster care that will continue every time they buy something for lunch, long after most people have forgotten about this story. And worse than that, there's going to be fear. There's going to be children afraid that they are going to be separated from their parents. There's going to be children afraid to eat. There's going to be children who will choose to skip meals because they are afraid of the consequences that they have already been explicitly threatened with. There's going to be children who will go hungry in the belief that they are protecting their own family by starving themselves. And they have legitimate reasons to be concerned. And kids aren't stupid. Many of them know what's going on along our southern border. They know the consequences that they were threatened with in the school's letter are already being exacted on families on our southern border, and they're fully aware that this could happen to them. Remember, this is Luzerne County. This is ground zero for the Kids for Cash scandal, where kids were funneled into the juvenile justice system with little or no reason so that others could profit. That happened here. So when people are told their kids can be taken away from them for some nonsense reason, this is not seen as an idle threat, because this has happened, and this continues to happen. And people know it, and they are scared. For the people who sent this letter, though, that's perfect. A large number of people they see as being beneath them, learning their station, and not trying to move beyond it. Kids scared of authority, less willing to voice concerns, less likely to speak out against injustices, less inclined to draw attention of any kind to themselves. Kids who will quietly accept whatever happens around them. Kids who will fear the people in charge, who won't ever challenge them. Since this story broke, multiple people have offered to pay the full debt, and the school has finally announced that it will take the initial offer and zero out the students' school lunch debt. The national pressure against them, the mockery and ridicule, and the very cogent accusations were all way too great, and they couldn't keep justifying their refusal to accept the money, because shame works both ways. But the message has still been sent loud and clear, and the kids and their parents recognize it. That's why the school was never interested in having the debt paid off. As long as the school has a debt to hold over people's heads, they have power over those people. The debt creates leverage, or at least the illusion of leverage. And if the debt is paid and that leverage disappears, the constant source of fear disappears along with it, and once that happens, the entire purpose of sending the letters is defeated. Because the letters weren't sent to collect money. It was never about the money.